morning. Welcome to LifePoint Crossing. I'm so glad that you're here. If you're watching online or if you're here in person, I really do love having you here. My name is Ross, and we are in this series. We've been actually for 3 weeks now. This is the final week. We are wrapping this up already today. I know that seems super fast. Honestly, it is kind of super fast. But this series called Heaven on Earth, and what this has come from is one of the most famous lines from one of the most famous prayers in the history of prayer from Jesus in Matthew 6, where he's teaching his disciples to pray. And one of the things he says is, "Father, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Let's make earth as much like heaven as we can. And I think that's a great idea. Not my idea, Jesus' idea, clearly, but who wouldn't want to be a part of that? Who wouldn't want who wouldn't want earth to be more like heaven? Who wouldn't want to be a part of making earth more like heaven? That's a great thing. And so we started week 1 with the idea that, you know what, in heaven, who's at the center? God is at the center. And he's going to be in the center of everything. And you know what? That's something that we can work toward here on earth in our own hearts and together sort of as a community following Jesus. We can move toward having God be more at the center. And then last week, we talked about, you know what? In heaven, it's so clear in Revelation, everyone is invited to the party. People there from every nation, race, tribe, tongue, language, people group, all together, all united. Everybody's loved, everybody's valued, everybody's wanted. And so we're glad you're here. For sure, absolutely. Whoever you are, we're glad you're here. You're not just invited, you're wanted, you're valued. And that's something also we can really move toward and make progress here on earth. Again, both in our own hearts and together as a community. And now today we're going to be finishing this up with the idea that, you know what, in heaven, there's going to be desire only for holiness and not sin. And that's an interesting thing to say or to think about, because I know that we have a lot of people here today from a lot of different sort of spots in their journey on following Jesus, right? And we have some people who hear something like that, and you think, that sounds amazing. You've been following Jesus for years, some of you decades plural, and you've been fighting and scratching and clawing, trying to make progress more and more away from sinfulness and toward only holiness. And you've made some progress, but it seems like you still have so far to go. And so that's one of the really amazing things that you think about with heaven, is to just be freed from that struggle. And now you won't need any sort of self-discipline. You won't need any self-control. You're not going to have those lapses that then you regret later. All you're going to have is just your desire for God to be fulfilled, and that's the only thing that's going to make any difference to you. That's the only thing that's going to matter to you. You're just going to pursue his glory and holiness with your whole heart. But that's not all of you, is it? There's some of us who, and especially we hear these words like holiness. It sounds pretty weird. It doesn't sound really like super exciting. And you don't really even necessarily think of sin as like the thing that you fight against. Like that's kind of one of your favorite things. Like you kind of look forward to that every now and then. And holiness sounds like the last thing you would want. And so there's some of you here, I know, and probably like you've decided that like, okay, you're in. You have come to decide to realize you believe Jesus is real. He was who he said he was. He did what he said he would do. He died and was resurrected. And so this is real. You believe it. And so it's really a pretty amazing thing that he would take the penalty for your sin. And so you're in. That's good. You want that. And you're going to try to really love him and follow him and honor him with your whole life. But really, it's not so much because you want to. It's more just like you feel like you should. He literally died for you. So you'll try to sacrifice yourself and lay down some of your desires. Okay, but holiness, I mean, to desire holiness, that kind of sounds to you a little bit like what it would be to, like, you're going to desire the tofu and the kale over the cheeseburger and the chili fries. Okay, like, that's what your doctor or the pastor or whomever says is what you're supposed to do. You'll try and mix in a salad, but like, why does everything that's supposed to help me have to be awful? Why is that the case? And of course, there's a couple things going on there, and part of it is that I think we tend often to misunderstand both sin and holiness. That's maybe kind of different messages for a different day. But another is that the person who I described to you a minute ago, who would be so thrilled to be a couple steps closer to holiness than they are today, here's what you need to understand, is they used to be where you are today. We all start at the same place. We all start at the beginning. And so here's what's really helpful to understand, is they're not different from you. They're just in a different place than you. And the same way that they're happier to be where they are now, today, than they were from where they used to be, okay, which is where you are, you also will be happier to be moving a couple steps forward toward holiness than you are right now. Because here's what maybe some of you noticed and maybe some of you didn't, is what I didn't say is that we're gonna bring heaven down to earth by being holy and not sinning. I didn't say that, because we're never really going to be able to get all of the way there until we're in actual heaven, certainly. What I said is that we want you to desire holiness and not sin. And that's a little different, and I think when you see the difference, you're actually gonna like it, because of course we want you to not sin. Of course, we're a church, we're following Jesus, of course. But even better than just having you not actually burn down your neighbor's house is if you don't want to burn down your neighbor's house. Okay? And actually, even better than that is if you actually wanted great things and desired goodness for your neighbor, even if they weren't always necessarily 100% super lovable. So that would be even better, right? So what we want is for you to desire holiness and not desire sin. And what you see then is you're actually going to be getting what you want when you are, in fact, moving toward holiness. It's not going to be about self-denial and discipline and giving up your desires. You're actually going to be fulfilling your desires and hitting the bullseye and being really excited about that when you are, in fact, actually moving toward holiness. And so I know some of this sounds very, very strange and foreign to a lot of us, because some of you, like, heaven doesn't even really sound good, right? Like, if I can say, listen, in heaven, like, God and the presence of God is going to make everything else just dumb. I think that's really true. And I know some of you, it doesn't even sound like, if you had to choose right now between heaven and a plate of nachos, you'd be like, I do like nachos. Now, if it's heaven or hell, then you're like, okay, hell, if that's even like a real thing, whatever it is, then okay, then all right, yes, heaven. But it doesn't even really sound that good. You're like, what, is it going to be like a great big like knitting circle with diet ginger ale, soft music, and lots of prayer time? Doesn't really, listen, there's no way to really explain. There's no way really for any of us to even understand. So don't judge the glory of God by my inability to describe what I don't even understand myself, all right? But the presence of God will make everything dumb. And the only thing that's going to matter, and the only thing that you will desire, even the tiniest bit, will be delighting in God and His glory and His goodness. And so heaven's not an above average retirement home where there's lots of nap times and they bring you a nice tapioca pudding. It's the manifest presence of God. And you won't have to worry about sin, and you won't even be tempted to sin, because how could you? Presence of God. And so not only will there be no sin, there will be no desire for sin. There will be desire only for holiness. And so that really gives us the opportunity then to chase after some of this even here on earth, and to answer a little bit of Jesus' prayer. Again, talk about living a bigger story 2,000 years later on the other side of the earth, to be a part of answering Jesus' prayer of making earth a little bit more like heaven. Pretty amazing, all right? And to prepare ourselves for the eternal joy that we'll have in our future, even right here. And so really what this is about today really is just about our desires. And The point for today might be fairly obvious. There's a bigger point in context, but Scripture talks about our desires in one place, in James 1, verse 14. Here's what it says. Again, this might seem kind of obvious, but it says that temptation comes from where? Well, from our own desires. Okay, which entice us and drag us away. And here's the word desires again. And that's what gives birth then to actual sin, right? To sinful actions. And when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. That's a whole nother message for a whole nother day. But the reason we're tempted to sin is why? Okay, I know, pretty obvious, because that's part of our desire, because we have a desire for sin. So that's easy, that's obvious, but that does also give us a really good starting point to begin asking and answering some better questions, doesn't it? Because then, if that's why we're tempted to sin, what's the best way toward holiness? Is it just like trying really hard to not obey our desires? Just stay strong, pray for strength, fight against the flesh. Have you ever tried to do that? Probably a lot of us have. I'm guessing what you experience is maybe you can make some progress, and you maybe can make some progress, and that's okay, that's good, but you're still going to be enticed and drug away, right? Isn't that what happens? And that's not like heaven. And so in thinking this through, what I kept coming back to is one of the most subtly brilliant lines anywhere in Scripture that's tucked away in Psalm 37. And I think this is pretty amazing. Here's what it says. It says, take delight in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's, there's our word, desires. And when you look at that, and then you look at that again, I think it says really more than it might at first appear. I actually think it says more even than we're going to talk about today, because we only have 30 minutes, and this is a couple of hours worth. But this is really one of my favorite kind of under-the-radar, brilliant verses in the Bible. But just at a glance, let's see this, okay, like we're talking about, through the perspective of heaven. Okay? What will our heart's desires be in heaven? Well, kind of already talked about this, right? It's going to be all our delight. It's going to be all in the Lord all the time. And I know there are different understandings or beliefs about what exactly will or won't go on in heaven, and I don't exactly know, but it seems very likely to me that we will be able to be solely and completely transfixed on God and his glory all the time for literally all of eternity without ever having our worship and admiration wane even the tiniest bit, because God is eternal and he is glorious and he is literally what we are created for, all right? And so I know that sounds strange maybe to a lot of us, okay? And 100% we don't understand, we can't understand from here, but if we can at least just understand that we can't really understand and accept this at least as something of a possibility, all right? That we'll be taking all our desire in the Lord, and coincidentally, what will our desire? We'll be taking all our delight in the Lord, and consequently, our desire is going to be to continue to delight in the Lord. This is really going to be something like a self-fulfilling kind of situation. It's really the exact opposite dynamic of what happens with drug addiction, right? Because with drugs, what happens is the deeper you go, the more you crave the drug, but the less it delivers for you, the less it satisfies. So this is going to be the exact opposite dynamic, where the deeper you go with God, the more you delight in him, the more delight you'll experience, and the more you will desire to continue to take delight in the Lord, except your returns don't diminish, they actually increase, and your satisfaction in him increases. This is really a wonderful thing. And so right now, if you don't desire to always and only delight in the Lord, listen, that's okay. I'm glad you're here. We're all in different places on the journey. But at least consider that this is what heaven will be like, and that you will not be let down. Again, don't judge the glory of God by my inability to describe it, but you have to know that you will throw out your old t-shirt that says, if there isn't bingo in heaven, then I don't want to go. Sitting there with your little dauber. Like, listen, heaven's going to be, God in heaven will be a lot better than bingo. So even if you're not there now, okay, none of us are there completely, what we can do is we can move toward this. okay, from wherever you are now. And when we begin working to take our delight in the Lord here on earth, here's what happens. It's exactly what this verse says, is God will give you your heart's desires. Here's the trick. Is I think a lot of times we would tend, at least I feel like I would tend to kind of read the verse backwards, right? And we start with our heart's desires. And you see this as kind of like a self-help formula where if you work the step, then God's going to give you what you want. So I desire a Corvette and like huge pectoral muscles and like a really big church so I can feel successful and important. And so if I can work the steps here, if I just do the formula, then God has to give me those things, right? Is that kind of what this is saying? Right? And some of my desires, honestly, didn't even make like the out loud in church list because they're not really that like church appropriate. Okay? Like didn't James just say that our desires are sinful? So what does that mean? Has God kind of backed himself into a corner on this? And so now if I just do this, like he's got to give me my sinful desires? Like should he have thought this through a little bit better? Well, I think God's going to be all right on this one because here's what actually happens. And listen, if this seems strange to you, I am very confident that you're sitting in a room with a whole bunch of people who will back up the fact that they've seen and had this happen in their own lives and experienced this themselves. Because here's what happens, is when you read the verse actually front to back, and you don't start with whatever your heart's desires is, what happens is when you take your delight in the Lord, he's not going to give you your sinful desires. Of course not. What he will do, what he delights to do, is to then give your heart good, godly desires. When you take delight in the Lord, he will give your heart desires. And this is really a wonderful thing. The reason you're tempted is because of your sinful desires, is what James said, right? So the best, most lasting, most foundational way to fight against that, to overcome that, and to move toward holiness, then is to have your desires transformed from the sinful desires into good, godly, noble desires. And then you get to actually experience, right, the delight that you desire. This is a wonderful thing. I think that's exactly like heaven. When you're there in the presence of God, okay, you're not going to be tempted by anything sinful. How could you be? I think I understand when people ask sometimes questions like, it's a common question, like, well, will we be able to sin in heaven? I think that makes sense from our perspective here. I think that's going to be complete nonsense from our perspective there. The reason why you won't sin in heaven isn't because you won't be able to or because you're going to lack the free agency to be able to make your own choices. It's going to be because you will have you will have desire for God and only God, and you will be completely fulfilled and satisfied in and delighted by that. That is literally what you're created for. It will be perfect. And that, we can work toward and bring a little bit of heaven here, right down on earth. And I know I've mentioned a couple times we're all in different places on something like this. And so some of you, maybe you're at the very beginning, or some of you, maybe you're not even sure you would want to take a first step into this at all. Listen, it's okay. We're glad you're here. We all started at the beginning. Here's my best suggestion is for how to start. It's simply to ask God to change you. You don't even have to desire holiness to say, God, change my heart so that I might desire holiness rather than sinfulness. I will tell you every single day in a couple different ways, I pray and I ask God that he will be changing me. And that's something we can do. And that's a prayer, listen, that I think God is absolutely delighted in and that God seems to delight to answer. And so listen, I understand. I know that Netflix and chill with a beautiful stranger is always going to be a little more exciting than a Bible study, right? The idea isn't that changes exactly. And sometimes, especially I know in the church world, in the Christian world, we try too hard. And we print up t-shirts that say things like, modesty's hot. Modesty's not hot. Modesty's modest. by definition, it's kind of boring, right? Isn't that like the point is like to, okay, so modesty is not going to be more exciting than promiscuity or whatever. I mean, that's just not true. But here's what happens. Here's what really can and does happen. Okay, is let God change your desires to where it's going to be you will want to serve and please your holy God more than whatever sort of excitement or benefit or whatever it is that your sin will give you or bring you, okay? I know a couple quick edits on that business deal that no one's even going to notice except for your commission check. Like, I know that's a strong draw on your heart. The idea isn't that you're going to stop liking commission checks. The idea is that you will come to rejoice in the truth and integrity and honoring and serving your wonderful, loving God in the honesty that comes with then being able to have only what you've rightfully earned. And then, even though you're not thinking about this at first, eventually that's going to move even more, and you're going to start to rejoice in it, not only taking what you've earned, but actually living on less than what you've earned, because your heart is going to be drawn to and going to rejoice in giving and being a part of ministry or various different areas of generosity or expressions of generosity. Okay, and you will desire that more than the brand new bass boat with a super cool captain's chair. It's not that you don't like fishing fishing's fine, but God will give your heart new desires that are stronger than whatever your current desires are. This is really a wonderful thing, and you don't have to think that holiness sounds awesome right now, right here where you sit today. All you have to do is just be willing to delight in the Lord. To delight in the Lord, not to be miserable with the Lord. Be willing to delight in the Lord and ask God to change your heart and make your earthly life a little bit more like your heavenly life. Okay, and here's how this is going to go for you. Again, people starting from all sorts of different starting points for today. I'm on the journey too. It looks really different based on where you are. When you first start, I think what tends to happen is there are a couple of really big things, maybe even kind of easy things that you need to clean up. There's some things that aren't right, okay? And it's a little bit like trying to knock the sour cream off of the spoon after taco night. And there's a couple big globs on there. And so, all right, well, let's get some of these globs off because you shouldn't be pushing heroin to the middle school. The money's so good, but it's not really what you should be doing, right? You shouldn't be kicking the homeless man every time you walk by just because you can. It's not what Jesus would do. So you're like, okay, I know there are a couple really big things that I need to clean up, and so I'll take those couple big steps, and I know I should do that. I know I can do that. All right, so that's fine. So you knock a couple big globs off. But once you do, now, you know what? There's this other little flag that's kind of hanging down there, and I should probably just knock some of that off, right? And so you start making progress, and now some of the things, that little tiny bit of sour cream, that didn't bother you when there was a whole spoonful, but now it's kind of starting to bother you a little bit. Some of the way maybe you kind of talk to people and make them feel dumb and kind of pick on them, really in that place that they feel. And it's always just kind of been something that you did and never really bothered. You didn't think that would ever be something that you'd want to change. Honestly, you thought it was kind of fun, kind of makes you feel important. But you know what? Maybe it's starting to bother me a little bit. Maybe the way that you look at pretty people that you're not married to, and you're like, well, everybody does that. This is not even, and all of your friends, and you say things that are really clever, like, just because I'm on a diet doesn't mean I can't look at the menu. Isn't that everybody? It's not really a problem. But then you're like, yeah, man, is that really who I want to be at this point? And you're knocking that spoon on the top of the sour cream carton, and not, it's still just not, you keep making progress, it keeps falling off, but that spoon's still not quite as clean as now you kind of wish it was. And a minute ago, eight bangs ago, you would have thought it looked pretty good, but now you're like, oh, there's still so much sour cream. on there. And so you make some more progress and you really start cleaning some things up. And now you come to a place where you're looking back on who you were a couple of years ago and you almost don't even recognize that person. But at the same time, you're kind of discouraged. Because you're like, man, the more I keep banging on this, the more I want to keep banging on this. And now what you see is you look around in your life and in your heart, and there's all these things that used to be basically invisible to you. Like you would have never, ever thought that they would have been problems or things that you would think about changing or much less desiring to change. But since you got rid of so many of the bigger ones, now these appear to be bigger ones because they're the biggest ones left. And now they're really causing you problems, and you're really frustrated by this. And what I want to say is, you guys, that's great progress. Here's what you're experiencing. Is something like this. I know the words are too small for you to see, but the blue line that's slowly and steadily going up, that is your practice of holiness. And the red line that's going up much more quickly, that is your knowledge of holiness. And so what happens is at the beginning, you're like, you know what, I just have a couple easy steps and I can be in like such a better place. And as far as I can see from here, that's really all there is to do. But the further you go, the further you see how much further there is to go. And so that can feel kind of discouraging. That can feel like, goodness, I'm looking ahead at where I want to be now. And I feel like I have further to go now than I even knew existed when I started. I used to think I had 12 feet to go, and now I feel like I have 100 feet to go. I feel like I've been moving backwards. But no, this is what's actually happening. And here's what I want to say, is you guys be encouraged that your knowledge of holiness and seeing where God wants to take you has increased so much. That's really a wonderful thing. That's really a wonderful evidence of God working in your life because you're delighting in the Lord and He's giving you now that desire for holiness that you never even used to have. That's a great thing. Don't be discouraged. Be encouraged. And so some of you, I know you're at the beginning, you don't even know if you desire holiness, especially since it's a strange word that's really super weird and we use it weirdly and no one really knows what it means except for it sounds like not that much fun. Listen, if you can just ask God to change your desire, if you can even if you only halfway mean it, if you can just utter those words to Him, you guys, I think that's a great place to start, and I think that's incredible evidence that God is already at work in your heart. I'm so glad you're here. Honestly, even just by being here, I'm a little bit optimistic that might be the beginning of God being at work in your heart. I'm so grateful for that. Man, and some others of you, you feel like you're somewhere along this and your progress feels so slow and where you want to be feels like it keeps getting further and further away. Oh, you guys, that's fantastic. I think that is a part of what it is to be transforming just a little bit at a time, of bringing that heaven down to earth in your life and in your heart. That's a great sign of God working in your heart, just that you would desire that in the first place. Desire for holiness and not for sin is going to be what eternity will be like for everyone who's forgiven in Jesus Christ. So that doesn't mean to sin now while you still can. That means you don't have to wait until you're there to start bringing a little more heaven to your life here on earth. Now, if you're good with context clues, you may have noticed that we have the elements for communion here this morning. And this is really a wonderful, visible, and physical way in which we say, you know what, Jesus, please transform me into more of who you are. And make me more into what you have been, the life that you led, of perfection and holiness and no sin. I want to take in some more of that. And so if you're here as a follower of Jesus, this is for you today. And in a moment here, I'll stop talking and they'll have some music play. And if that's you, you can just come up, grab one from whichever side you come to. There's both the bread